The next principle is to satisfy your base needs so that you stop craving. This is very important. I have a episode that I released quite a bit ago called Using Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs to Self-Actualize. And what I talked about there is it's all about satisfying your lower needs, your basic needs for shelter and water and food and sex and this sorts of stuff and some friendships and some self-esteem stuff, like your career. You got to handle that stuff so you're not craving it, so that you can move higher up the pyramid to this higher metaphysical, existential stuff that we talk about. This is so important. Which leads to the next closely related principle of master your basic survival and livelihood. This is utterly important. If you don't do this, it's as though you were a lion on the savannah and you didn't know how to hunt. A lot of people these days, especially young folks, I see this very often, teenagers, people in their early 20s, they grew up in a cushy suburb somewhere in the United States or maybe in Europe, and their parents coddled them. And so these kids, they just spent their whole childhood playing video games and watching movies and just like dicking around in school with their friends and stuff, smoking weed and this kind of stuff. And then by the time they're 20 and maybe they finish even university, they get out into the real world and they have no idea about how to actually survive or make a livelihood. And then they start thinking about some of the high, lofty things I talk about, like consciousness and psychedelics and enlightenment and this. But it's like, what enlightenment can there be when you don't even know how to hunt? Learn how to hunt. The modern day equivalent for human beings of what a lion does on a savannah is business. Learn business. Learn how business works. Learn how money works. This is absolutely essential. Without this, you're going to be crippled. You need to be able to just handle the basic things like paying your rent, being able to afford food. If you can't do these things, forget about enlightenment for now. Focus on handling that. And of course, that's all a function of your inner game. So it's not because the economy is bad that you struggle with survival and livelihood. It's because your parents and your schooling and your childhood, they didn't program you with those the inner game survival skills that you need to earn a living in the savannah, the modern day savannah that humans live in and grow up in, which is cities and suburbs. See, a lion needs a certain set of skills to be able to survive in savannah, and a human in the 21st century needs a certain kind of skills and a certain kind of inner game and psychology to be able to make a living and survive in a city or in a suburban environment. That's super important. I spent at least probably 10 years of my life really working on developing a way for how to be independent and survive on my own without depending on my parents or money from other places or anything like that. So I could be self-sufficient. And then it's based on that foundation that then I could go and do the higher stuff that I do. I couldn't do that otherwise. Like if I was worrying about how to pay my bills tomorrow, I couldn't do this other work that I'm doing, the higher stuff. Because I would always be in this kind of cycle of fear, not knowing what's next, how to make ends meet, this sort of stuff. You got to figure that out. If it takes you 5 or 10 years, that's okay. Figure that out. That's basically what you need to be spending your teenage years and all of your 20s up through your 30s doing. You want to solve that by the time you're 30, ideally, if not sooner. The next core principle is mastery. You need to have something, at least one thing in your life that you are going to plan to become a master in. I don't care what it is. There are millions of options. You could be a master at drawing, painting, music, DJing, weightlifting, life coaching, writing, programming, whatever. You got to pick one thing though and do it. This jack of all trades thing where you're just dabbling in a bunch of shit, that doesn't work. You need one thing that you're going to master. This is connected with your life purpose. This is also connected with your thing that I just said about survival and livelihood. The lion is a master at chasing down antelopes. master at hunting. This gives you certain stability. It also gives you enjoyment because really your work, which you're going to be doing most of your life, the enjoyment that you get from that depends on how much of a master you are. And it takes 5 or 10 years to become a master in something. So you got to pick one thing and do it so that you could produce excellent work and so that you could be a creator and you could be a massive value provider to society. One of the biggest things I think young people are screwing up on these days, millennials and so forth, is that they don't pursue mastery. They're not a master at anything. They don't know how to do anything. And therefore they can't provide value to anyone. And therefore you're stuck with some kind of waitressing job or working at McDonald's. Yeah, that's what happens when you're a master of nothing. Start by mastering one thing that you really enjoy. And it is important that you enjoy this thing that you're going to be mastering because you're going to be putting so much time and effort into it. So you better enjoy it a lot. Now, this doesn't mean you can't have hobbies. I'm not saying that, like right now, if you're playing a guitar just for fun and you're an amateur at it, that doesn't mean you have to become a master guitarist. Because, hey, maybe your field of mastery is programming. So if you're a master at programming, sure, you can go dabble in guitar and you can go dabble in painting. It doesn't matter because you're a master in programming. You got at least that one thing. But if you're not a master at anything and you're just dabbling and trying a bunch of different stuff without selecting anything and being decisive and clear about it and not being certain about what you want to master, that's going to come back to bite you really hard later in life. And the older you get, the harder it is to master things. So start young. But if you're old, still do it. Better late than never.